welcome back to the podcast, everyone. I am your host, Jeff Miller, and if it's your first time tuning in, welcome to Destination Aviation, where we talk about everything aviation. And today we are flying solo. We had a couple really good interviews recently, and but this podcast, if you listen to some of the old episodes, it's really started off as an area for Jeff to bitch. I'm kidding. For Jeff to explain everything that he has going on in the aviation industry and everything that everybody else has going on in the aviation industry. But no, it feels good to get back into kind of the traditional episode. Like I said, we'll be doing a mix of interviews and a mix of other stuff with other people as time comes. But for now, let's focus on some of the things that we've done in the past and conversation-wise before. So whether you're on your flight somewhere, I've been getting a lot of emails and comments that people like to listen to this actually when they're traveling, and not unsurprised because we have a lot of people now in our industry that do a lot of traveling for their day jobs wherever they go. And we also have a lot of people that listen from the outside that travel as well. So if you're at your favorite airport, feel free to drop a message. I always put it on there. Love that. Speaking of which, I had an email in from Marcus. He said his favorite airport is the Istanbul airport. He didn't elaborate beyond that, so I can't really say why. Marcus, you can always feel free to send me another message as to why, but I did look it up, and it does look like a pretty cool airport. I don't know too much about it, like I said. And beyond the shout out, I'm glad it's your favorite airport. Looks cool. If you have a favorite airport, feel free to send it along. I also had a message a while back on the website from Andrew, who asked me what my favorite, not my favorite tree, but if I were a tree or a piece of wood, what would I be? And it took me a few episodes to really think about what kind of piece of wood I would want to be. My mother always said I was a blockhead, so I would have to assume that it would be a sturdy, kind of solid wood. But I do like crab trees. I got, or such a apple crab trees. Is that, I don't know, crab tree. I work with someone who will correct me all the time, so they'll probably tell me at some point, it's not a crab tree, apple tree, blah, blah, blah. But let's just go with apple tree that are, maybe just for, okay, here's what I'm getting at. I have an apple tree in my yard, and one of the favorite activities that I have in the, I guess it's more like end of summer, early fall, the apples are ripe. And I have deer out there, and so I like to pull down a whole, like, let's say, bushel of them and roll those apples over to the deer, and it's very delightful for me. So I guess I would like to be a fruit-bearing tree of some kind. Serve a purpose. Feel free, like you're feeding somebody out there. I don't know. But Andrew, I don't know if that answers your question about wood or not, but there you go. If you want to tell me what piece of wood you want to be, Andrew, I'll throw it back onto the channel. Maybe some balsamic wood, like those old planes we used to throw around as kids. We've updated those a little bit now to make them a little more aerodynamic and bring them into the 21st century, kind of like a boom supersonic style of balsamic plane. But I suppose maybe that would be an appropriate wood as well. Well, I am fresh off the heels on my trip back from Colorado. I think I mentioned it in the last episode, but we were out near Frisco and Breckenridge, which was around 10,500 feet. We stayed at a campground resort out there, and it was pretty cool. I have been to Colorado. If you listen to some of the past episodes, you know that. Never lived there, but have spent some time. But this is the longest duration of time that I have spent at 10,500 feet. So we're there roughly about 10 days. And it was cool. It was fun. But I didn't kind of realize the oxygen level and the change in it. And from the research I was doing at the time, it would look like about a 33% reduction in oxygen levels. Which one made me a little loopy and a little slower than I normally am. But it also got me thinking about hypoxia, and maybe we should talk a little bit about that in one of our episodes, and hence the solo episode today, to discuss a little bit about the phenomenon of hypoxia and what happens when you're flying. So that's kind of the general idea of today's episode and some of the things we're going to talk about and some of the incidents in the past. It also made me think the movie The Shining, and this is a theory I have now, and I have not seen this anywhere, but considering the Overlook Hotel was so high in Colorado, maybe Jack Nicholson just had that form of hypoxia from the high altitude, and that's why he started, singing. Was he singing in that? No, he was singing. Maybe I still have hypoxia. No? Now that I'm thinking about it, a little lack of oxygen never really helped anybody. It probably didn't help me at all. Why he was seeing so many ghosts in that Overlook Hotel. It's quite possible it was just due to a lack of oxygen. But it was funny because when we were up there, the weather, and I was looking around obviously because I'm in aviation and didn't see actually any fixed wing aircraft go over where we were. Vail was kind of the closest, but the phenomenon of watching, the weather as it goes through the hilltops there, kind of almost creating that weather pattern. I'm not opposed. I wouldn't be opposed to flying up that high. I've never done mountain flying, but I definitely would go with a qualified instructor who knew the area before I would do anything up there. I did see some helicopters, and we actually went past a restaurant that had some old aircraft just like sitting out in front of it. I think they were like cooking out of it. I don't know. If there's anybody from Breckenridge and you want to explain what that is, feel free. One looked like the nose of maybe like an A320 that was an old Spirit airline. I looked at them. I couldn't really figure out what was going on there. But like I said, maybe they're cooking barbecue or something out of the back of it. I don't know what they have going on. And then I did get another request in from somebody else, actually two people, to talk about this whole 747 donation deal that's going on with Air Force One. If you haven't listened to some of our old episodes, we have a whole episode dedicated to Air Force One and kind of just having a conversation about how it came about and where it is. A lot of people, of course, want to ask opinions, right? People were asking my opinion, and I'm so fortunate to have people ask what my opinion is. I always love to share what I have to think. And I'll say up front, I've never been offered a $400 million jet. So that I'm not sure if somebody wants to offer me that, or if you want to even offer me a $40,000 plane, I will consider what my response would be. But yes, so the current Air Force One is a 747-200, which first flew in 1990. It was designed under the Reagan administration, and then came in on the tail end of the George H.W. Bush administration. So it's been flying for quite a while. I think I had mentioned this before, but I had an opportunity to get on Air Force One, which was awesome. I enjoyed it. Couldn't take a phone with me. That was part of the deal, so I just had to put those into the old memory bank when I was able to get on Air Force One. And then got the picture in front of it, like the obligatory shot that everybody gets when they get into aviation of standing in front of Air Force One if you're so lucky to have it at your airport. But the Qatar or Qatar, depending on however you want to call it, I've been talked about this many times, and I've been given many different thoughts and ideas, but the reigning one is, if you so choose to call it either way, you can. So the Qatar aircraft, or Qatar, that was offered as a 747-8, so it is a palace in the sky. It is, I mean, I looked at it online, it's beautiful. Obviously, and we've talked about airports on this podcast a lot. Trump has, and I remember watching a documentary when I was younger, and it was, I think, around the time Donald Trump was getting into The Apprentice, and everybody was talking about how he flew on that 757. At the time, at least, you could get a really good deal, and even today, I say a really good deal. You could get a deal if you're in the market and you have the money and get a deal on a aircraft type like that, rather than a very expensive corporate jet like a Gulfstream or a Challenger or something. And it does reduce the amount of airports that you can go into because obviously runway length and all that. So these, especially a 747, you're limited on the type of airports you can go to, etc. But the deal is, they give it to the Trump administration, it goes to the foundation, it goes to his presidential library when he's done with this term. However, as when I was on Air Force One, they don't talk about any of the security stuff. We all talk about what Air Force One the movie was. That's probably our general idea of knowledge. I can say similar into the movie, but obviously Hollywood likes to exaggerate. But there are things that are known out there that, the current 747 can take the pulse of a nuclear explosion, stuff like that, things that are more public knowledge. It has the flares based into it. So I've heard the same things out there where if we were to take this aircraft, it would also still be towards the tail end of Trump's administration to actually use it if they brought it up to the same standards as the 747 aircraft today. But obviously, rules can change and rules can bend. And I did hear an interesting tidbit the other day where fighter aircraft could actually follow this 747-8 when President Trump was on it. Obviously, the livery would probably be what you've seen him showcase away from the Kennedy years and the Kennedy design of kind of that baby blue gold we have now, and a dark blue and red style type aircraft. I guess I'll say as an opinion base, the aircraft's not going to save any money. That's for sure. The aircraft's going to cost taxpayers a lot of money, even though it's a gift. That's for sure. But so does Air Force One currently. I mean, I think it's $1 million. At least when I was talking to them, they want to say it was $1 million for them to move the plane, basically. They were to go anywhere, minimum $1 million right out the door. So it's not cheap to send the President of the United States around. And like I go back to, if somebody were to offer me a $400 million jet, maybe. I don't think I'll ever have to suffer that issue. But it is interesting because, when you look at some of the ideology around the aircraft and the donation of it, and even I think when they fly overseas, they typically bring the both, because there's actually two Air Force Ones. There's two 747s. There's a backup one when the president is traveling to foreign countries. So I would assume they probably would still operate that aircraft in such a manner. The other two that are being built right now by Boeing, those are delayed, and it doesn't seem like there's any end in sight there for those two aircraft to be completed. So it's interesting. I don't know. Like I said, it's, I guess, sticking to the facts. It's not cheap. It's going to be expensive. It's potential. Could this aircraft, 747s as being phased out on commercial airliners, could also be used potentially for parts. But if it's going to the presidential library, I don't know how intact they're going to try to keep it. So we'll have to see how it continues to unfold. Again, it's expensive, but everything we do is expensive. So it would be interesting, though, I say, as an aviation enthusiast, as someone who just likes aviation, I would be curious to see what they would do with the plane. How would they configure it? I think they said right now it can hold 88 passengers. Would they keep all the style that's in it currently, or would they change it around? The press corps, at least traditionally, flies with the president. So again, it would be interesting to see what they would do with the aircraft as, retrofitting to Air Force One. So I don't know if that completely answers everyone's questions on it. I don't really know where my headspace is either with it. Air Force One's a cool plane. We'll just see how it goes and monitor it. And I think at the very least, take it for what it is, as a aviation curiosity nugget of this 747 that potentially could turn into, from a palace flying in the sky to, I guess, an presidential palace flying in the sky. I don't know. But I haven't been to the Reagan Museum in California, and they have his Air Force One, but the one he used on loan permanently to that library. So I would assume, when all said and done, that's what the plan is here being said about this 747. So at some point, maybe further down the road, we will get an opportunity to get on it and see what they did with it. So as we're going along in this podcast, and it's kind of evolving, at least in the beginning here, into a viewer mail kind of segment. If you remember the old David Letterman's, where they get sacks and sacks of letters. But Rebecca sent an email. Rebecca is in Spokane, Washington. And Rebecca said, do we have any thoughts on the announcement from Sean Duffy to modernize air traffic control, and if we feel like it will make it safer? If you go back and listen to one of our older episodes, I think my general thought on the industry is it's absolutely safe. But yes, I think updating air traffic control is a good thing. I know there's a coalition of all the alphabet soups of the world out there that represent different segments of aviation. So whether you're a general aviation pilot, an aircraft operator, an airport operator, they've all come together to support what Secretary of Transportation Sean Duffy wants to do with modernization. Part of that, building of a new kind of air traffic control system is around four components of infrastructure: communication, surveillance, automation, and facilities. We talked a little bit about how ATC works here before. If everybody wants, you can feel free to shoot me a message if you want to do more of a detailed on how air traffic control currently works. But it's not wrong when you hear radar from the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. I actually, when I worked in Laredo, Texas, we wanted to get a radar down there. And I learned through my conversations in Washington that they don't even make radars anymore because they made as many as they needed, and then the technology was in place. The company went out of business, didn't need it anymore. So when they get a new radar, they're cannibalizing from another market. So we weren't able. I mean, there was multiple factors to try to. One, we wanted to improve what the surveillance was at the Laredo airport. But we ran into a lot of issues, one of them being manufacturing of radar and one of those older systems trying to install. So, developing and making it better, absolutely. I think that this plan is long overdue, and I don't think anybody really is sitting on the sidelines saying, like, oh, no, this isn't good. I think it's a good thing. And the thing about the air traffic control and the airspace in the United States is we do produce really good aviators. Back to the example I had earlier with Laredo down in Mexico, the envy of our air traffic control system. When you would talk to flight schools, they would want to come to the United States and train because the system was open to everybody to use, which has been one of the kind of pillars or cornerstones for us in aviation to use. And it's all in practicality. I know the airlines are the predominant user of it, and trust me, Jeff Miller's not flying into O'Hare with his 172. Now, I could, in theory, I suppose, but I'll probably be in a penalty box for a long time, and you know what? Rightfully so. In the case of me getting in front of a bunch of people that are doing stuff, even, when I fly out of the airport that I work at, a lot of times, there might be jets that are leaving, and I get it. They're burning a lot more fuel, and there may be 3 or 4 jet departures before I get mine, and I don't have heartburn over that. I know some people do, but I think that there's enough airports and stuff we'll share within the system that our air traffic controllers are a good bunch of people. They really try to help and work with us, and getting them some new technology is great. Like I said, I was an adopter of ForeFlight, which I got on my own, which there's so many amazing things you can just do now on an iPad that wasn't available to me when I first started flying. And so it's improved my situational awareness greatly. And so I wouldn't fly without it now. And I know other people too have talked to others. I don't need a radio. And by regulation, that's true. But not a style of flying I typically, or no, a style of flying I should not typically, not that I would probably do at all. But, I also understand, some of those appetites to fly maybe back the way that people used to. And that's your prerogative. But I do think, our system does need upgrading. I think this is a good measure to start that. There's not a ton of detail. Some of the critical actions were replacing antiquated telecommunications. That's over at 4,600 sites, which includes 25,000 new radios, 475 new voice switches, replacing 618 radars that have gone past their life cycle, at least according to the DOT, addressing runway safety by increasing the number of airports with surface awareness initiative, SAI, to 200. I don't know what the current number is at, but at least to 200. And those would be your bigger airports that would typically get that. I think actually Grand Rapids it's a good airport. It's not a huge airport, but I think that was on the list. I think I saw an announcement there, but kudos to them, I guess, for getting that in. Building 6 new air traffic control centers for the first time since the 1960s. I haven't seen anything where they peg these. We've talked about the air route traffic control centers. My brother and his wife worked at Cleveland Center, which is in Ohio, and there's currently, I believe, 22 air route traffic control centers. Probably what would end up happening here is they would build these in a, probably a location where there's more users of the airspace. It's interesting because I believe in Australia, with technology. They really reduced it down to 2 centers now. Because with the way technology works, you pretty much could be anywhere and control traffic. You don't necessarily, like, especially in an air route traffic control center, you're not there looking at the airplanes, right? You're handling aircraft en route. And so there's been a lot of conversation about where to put these centers, or should you reduce. So it's interesting. I've heard that in the past. Now they're saying to add to it. But I will say, like, you hear a lot in these conversations, especially congressional conversations. When you have an air route traffic control center like Cleveland Center, I think it's over 500 people that work there. Most of these jobs are 6-figure salaries, right? So if you think about a U.S. representative or a senator from a state, you probably don't want to be the one that loses an air route traffic control center. So that's always been the debate, right? It's been developed over time. But if you start consolidating or moving these locations around, that's at least something that's taken consideration. Not saying necessarily right or wrong, but the reality of the situation is that's a big part of it. So now that they're introducing potentially 6 more, I would assume that will go hand in hand with locations across the U.S. probably where they see the need to split up some of this traffic. We've seen everything that's been happening at Newark with antiquated technology, busyness of the airspace. They have, I think, Boston Center there, Washington, D.C. Center, which I think is in Leesburg, Virginia, New York Center, and then Cleveland Center is to the west of there. But no, and you've heard this with, at DCA with the telecommunications line that was in disrepair for a few years between them and the Pentagon. So again, I don't think anybody's disagreeing with, the ability for us to all kind of invest into a future of airspace that works well for everybody. And then it's interesting because Alaska always has a carve out. We talked about this in any rule. Alaska has a carve out on this of 174 new weather stations, but kind of goes to some of our conversations about mountains and mountain flying, which is a lot of the theme of today. So this is kind of a good segue into our overarching theme of the show, which was hypoxia and flying in the mountains. And one last kind of segue there, because I did mention Newark. We did have a message in from Ron. Ron didn't put in where he's located, but he asked if it was safe to fly into Newark because he had a flight in a week. Absolutely. I would fly into Newark in a heartbeat. I have no reason to go to Newark, but if I did, I would have no reservations flying there. Again, the system's really safe. So if I could say at least that, as you're out there traveling, it is the safest mode of transportation. And keep it in mind, as we did statistically, it's way more dangerous in your automobile than it would be in our friendly skies to the above of us. Is that it? To the north, to above? I don't know. Feel free to throw in a message to me. dapodcast85@gmail.com. If I didn't get anything that any of you said today right, you want to say something else, feel free. If you want to drop me a message, please feel free. I do try to get to them. I think it's cool to interact with everybody, especially if you're sending me messages through the email. Love to read them, love to see what they have to say, so feel free to do that. So off to our main story now. Like I said, I was up in Breckenridge at Tiger Run Resort. Don't know why it was called Tiger Run Resort. Tigers, well, maybe some people have bought in tigers, I'm sure. Probably the same as Pablo Escobar's cocaine hippos, which have now find a flourishing life in Colombia when they were brought over. But we were staying there, and like I said, you started to feel kind of woozy. They had a sweet arcade game there. I should say arcade room. What arcade game in particular? Led Zeppelin for me. I enjoyed it. I have not seen a Led Zeppelin pinball machine, but yours truly was getting winded just playing pinball. And I'm like, man, I know I'm out of shape, but am I this out of shape? And there was a lack of oxygen. And so, the first kind of couple of days, slight headache, kind of lethargic. And I thought, I'll say this, I wouldn't want to be flying in that state, make sure I have all my wits about me. And so we went down to the local grocery store, which at least in Frisco, Colorado, no bottled water. I cannot buy bottled water, which I can understand maybe some of that, but I would also say there was a lot of trash thrown around every location that I went. So while I kind of understand the bottled water stuff, I also say I don't think it's completely solving the issue of littering. I myself, I do pick up trash usually when I'm out hiking. I do like to hike, and I hate seeing trash thrown around. I think throwing garbage out probably is very indicative of someone's total personality. So I'll be the first to say I would probably judge someone if I saw them just throw trash out, and I do when I drive home from work and stuff. If I see somebody just whip a bag of trash into the woods, whether that's fast food or whatever it might be, I do. I take issue to it because I think it probably again is indicative to who they are as a person. So, if you want to be judged by me, that's probably the one thing that I would say. I'm like, really? You couldn't hold on to it. You couldn't find a trash can. Now we all have to stare at it. Thanks. Um, but I went down to the grocery store where you can probably pick up here. Is that a beef, this water thing? It could be. I don't know. But I go down to the store and they have cans of air. Because I thought in my mind, I'm like, I wonder like the movie Spaceballs with Mel Brooks where he opens up the can. Air. And they did. So I bought a can of that. And then for the rest of the time we're there, probably about 6 cans into it now of sucking down this air. Because it was, you would go to sleep. It would, feel like there was pressure on your chest. They say people get acclimated. I don't know. Some days I felt better. Some days I felt worse. And then it would just kind of onset. And they say your breathing, your rhythm and stuff at night, it can make it a little difficult. And started me again thinking as I'm looking around and looking at style of flying and type of flying. There's a video that I saw a while back. There was an aircraft that crashed in the 80s. It was a single engine aircraft, crashed into the mountains, and they were actually filming at the time with an old JVC style recorder with a tape deck on the aircraft, and it looked like they caught a downdraft going into a mountain. They were out surveying for beetles for the United States Forest Service, and they were actually pushed into the mountainside. And Hypoxia didn't play a role necessarily in that crash, but as I got back, 2 events kind of have happened. I'd say one event was a tragic accident that happened at the Rocky Mountain Metropolitan Airport, where a door blew open on 1963 Beechcraft Baron 95, November 7501 Sierra. Listen to the audio on this. It's still so fresh and new. I'm not gonna put the audio on here. You can go look at it online if you so choose to go listen to it. But it did the aircraft. On departure, the door popped open, which isn't unheard of. Obviously, it's very noisy and stuff when that happens. I don't know what the distraction was that caused the aircraft to go down from there. Did crash off from the airport. The pilot was making radio calls back saying it was very hard to hear. 2 people on board, unfortunately, didn't make it, but it was near to where we were. And again, not necessarily, not saying obviously it was low to the ground. I'm not saying hypoxia or anything like that, but probably the risks of not even probably mountain flying in this case, but more flying in general, and just a word of caution of preparing if that happens. I usually always go back and check because normally I will always keep the cargo door locked on the plane that I fly, but I always check it, and I would say probably when I go to check it, 70% of the time it's unlocked. I think a lot of people fly with them unlocked. And even locking, I'm saying something can go wrong, something can break. But to be aware of it, like I said, again, I've actually worked many instances where a luggage compartment door or something were to open it. Unfortunately, in this case, again, it didn't appear from what the audio is that there was anything beyond the distraction, unfortunately. But we always reserve until we hear further from the NTSB. But one case that came out more recently with a finding while I was out there, which does go to the hypoxia conversation, was for a accident that we had spoke about previously from an unresponsive aircraft that was flying over Washington, D.C. It was, of course, over D.C., so F-16s responded. I mean, they typically would in an unresponsive aircraft, but especially here, which was a loss of pressure on a Cessna Citation flying from Elizabethton, which is in eastern Tennessee, to Long Island, New York. The jet rose to 34,000 feet and flew over Long Island, then turned back to the southwest, flying over Washington and Virginia. When the F 16s reached up to the aircraft, they could see someone in the flight deck slumped over with no movement in the cabin. Minutes later, the Cetacean crashed into the forest near Montebello, Virginia, leaving a crater in the ground. NTSB has found, based on the lack of communication to air traffic control on departure, said the likely that the pilot passed out during climb and that the autopilot flew the aircraft an additional 300 miles until the aircraft no longer could maintain flight. 5 things in the plane were overdue for maintenance inspections at the time of the crash, including the co-pilot oxygen mask. An additional 26 problems were noted on the aircraft a month earlier, including several items related to the pressurization and environmental control system. The owner chose not to address them, and the report noted that. 2 days before the crash, maintenance workers also saw the pilot's oxygen mask was missing, and oxygen levels were so low that passengers' mask would not have worked. The 65-year-old pilot had over 35,000 hours of experience flying, especially this type of plane. The jet was owned by Encore Motors of Melbourne, Florida. The owner's 2-year-old granddaughter was also on the aircraft when it crashed. Hypoxia is the shortage of oxygen in the blood, which causes someone to pass out if they don't have enough oxygen. Now, near here in Illinois, when I go flying, in Part 91, we've talked about this, federal aviation regulations, does require the use of supplemental oxygen after 30 minutes of exposure of altitudes between 12,500 and 14,000 feet. So you have heard some pilots. I know when Oshkosh EAA Air Adventure was going on and I was working in Michigan, we would get pilots that would come over that would go up that high to get across the lake, where if they were on a single engine aircraft, they would bump up to 14,000 feet, then come back down. Again, prerogative of the pilot, but many for-hire type of crews, they have policies in place that there must be supplemental oxygen whenever the cabin altitude is above 10,000 feet. So again, there is some federal regulations here about when to require it, and then also probably what's best practice for company policy. Now, I would say this, the scary thing about hypoxia, not to be scary about anything, but about hypoxia, especially when you're flying an aircraft, why they say, to put your mask on first is it's something obviously can onset quickly if there's a depressurization in a commercial airliner. But secondly, if you're flying just yourself, like Jeff Miller in a single engine aircraft, the onsets of it can be slow. According to the FAA Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, impairing effects from hypoxia are often vague and experienced differently by different individuals. They include confusion, disorientation, diminished judgment and reactions, worsened motor coordination, difficulty communicating, which I do a lot. Maybe I have hypoxia when I do this podcast because sometimes I have to go back as I'll flub a word. I literally just flubbed motor coordination. I had to go back and redo it because I sometimes will keep on moving, but not that time. It sounded, you'd be like, what's he talking about? Warshaw, Indiana? Difficulty communicating, performing simple tasks, and a false sense of well-being, diminished consciousness, and if conditions aren't remedied or mitigated, can result in death. Like I said, where I was at, roughly from the calculations I was doing, was about 33% less oxygen. I could feel that under a sustained period. I actually had an interview a long time ago with Vail, Colorado, many years ago, and didn't get the job. But after being up there, I kind of thought, well, I'm kind of glad I didn't, because at least at that time, I don't know, after 10 days up there, my body wasn't really responding well to that type of altitude, at least for me. And I was really happy to get back down to Denver, and then I was really happy to get back to Illinois, right at sea level, sucking in all this oxygen over here. But it's nice, you take it for granted, you get to, feeling well and all that stuff, and water, but air is something we all take for granted. It's everywhere. You don't really have to do anything extra to go get it, usually. But when it's not there, you're like, boy, something feels off. I feel a little bit weird here. But, back to when Jeff was a teenager, listen to his Ja Rule. I also listened to old music when I was younger too. I don't think a lot of people do these days. I was talking to somebody younger, and they were like, "Oh, I don't know who." I forget. I think it was Nelly we were talking about. I'm like, "Well, okay, I knew who Styx was, and the whoever else was, what Def Leppard. I knew who those people were, anyways." But my first airport back around the Ja Rule days, my boss Bill, you'd come in and you knew what kind of mood Bill was in when you first got to the airport, whether it was going to be a good day or if Bill was going to be like, go out and hit that rental car. Anyways, Bill used to love to watch golf, and if anybody remembers the golfer Payne Stewart, he wore that distinctive flat cap. But I remember, obviously, the accident and incident, which ultimately ended up being hypoxia, which brought down his Learjet. The aircraft was leaving Orlando and heading to Dallas Love Field, which we just spoke with Mr. Carino, who who runs the Dallas Love Airfield. Payne Stewart, 3 other passengers, 2 pilots took off out of Orlando, and they were flying to Dallas Love Field, and this was October 25th of 1999. Same scenario as we just talked about. The aircraft lost communication and flew all the way to South Dakota, where it ultimately crashed from taking off from Orlando International Airport at 9:20 a.m. 42-year-old Payne Stewart, he had just won the U.S. Open champion, again known for his traditional golf attire and his smooth golf swing. I had to say that 3 times because every time I kept saying golf stream, just was stuck in my head. Golf swing, his smooth golf swing that he had. See, look at that. I almost said it again. I guess golf stream's just stuck in my head for some reason. Maybe they put a chip in your head when you're in aviation just to remember to say it. But unfortunately, him and his crew took off out of Orlando, headed to Dallas. And we're going to play a little bit of that audio here now for you starting off, and then we'll stop and talk about each section. But I did want to start with there's a lot of audio out there. You could get, because they flew from Florida, ultimately crashing in South Dakota. You're talking over 2 hours of air traffic control audio. So we'll just go through a few segments here, stopping. But I wanted to start with the weather briefing, obviously, because it seems like a quintessential pilot getting his weather briefing and going before we get into the rest of it here.
St. Petersburg. Good morning. This is Learjet 47 Bravo Alpha. We're going to be going IFR from Orlando McCoy to Dallas Love. Okay. Departing at 1300, and we'll go on at 390. Okay. Like a weather briefing.
No, there isn't a whole lot to tell you.
That's good.
High pressure, clear skies.
Wonderful.
Maybe a few clouds floating around, but mostly clear.
Okay.
Got clear in Orlando with 10 miles, winds 360 at 6. Dallas says clear in 10, winds 150 at 9.
Now, I know this is standard and not necessarily any result of the accident, but I think for me it speaks to the human side, because I've actually listened to most of the audio on this of the the pilot, the people on the plane, and you can just kind of tell, okay, weather briefing, and it's so many times in our industry things are so rushed and pushed, and so I kind of like this back and forth a little bit. One, to show kind of the human side of one of these accidents, these people that flying these aircraft and people that are on these aircraft, and that this is just kind of a I say some, I don't know if playful banter is the right word, but if you listen to some of these audios and then, if you get online and you hear some of these things about, and usually you hear the worst of the worst, right? Those are the ones that get the most views for people, is a JFK controller yelling at a pilot, or a pilot yelling at a JFK controller. It seems like JFK is always on there. But, it's kind of interesting to me to hear just kind of this banter back and forth. But it sounds like really a VFR style type of day flying. I mean, obviously they're going IFR, but anyways, I kind of enjoyed hearing that up front. So now we'll move forward to where the aircraft actually was en route and climb and lost contact.
Good morning, Jack. 47 Bravo Alpha 230 for 26 hours.
47 Bravo Alpha, Jack. Center climb and maintain flight level 390.
390, Bravo.
So at this point, the first officer of the Learjet has received to go to 39,000 feet from Jacksonville Center, and this was the last time that there was any audio from the Learjet itself. And then the next clip we'll listen to here is No Reply, which came about 6 minutes later.
November 47 Bravo Alpha, contact Jack Center on 135.65. November 47 Bravo Alpha, contact Jack Center on 135.65.
At this point, we talked before, air route traffic control centers are handing off within Severe Cleveland Center. Different controllers work different geographical areas, so this controller is handing off to the next controller outside of his geographical area, and there's no response from the aircraft. For about another 5 minutes, the controller attempted to make contact with November 47 Bravo Alpha, the Learjet 35, to no avail. Now, at this point, it sounds like the controller enlisted another aircraft to try to communicate, which sometimes they do if they're closer in proximity to the radio, obviously because they're flying nearby, to the aircraft to communicate.
November 47 Bravo Alpha from Cabana. Jack is calling you. How do you read?
Did he answer you any, Cabana?
No contact, Cabana 182.
Okay, thank you. I think we got a dead pilot up here. He's through his altitude and off course now, so we don't know what's going on.
All right.
And now that ATC audio I shortened up a bit. There was a lot longer between the responses there from the aircraft to the non-response from Payne Stewart's Learjet, just because you're all listening on your devices somewhere and you don't want to listen for 20 or 30 seconds of just static. You already get enough of listening to me talk for 20 to 30 seconds, and that's enough for you beyond just static. Now, you heard the air traffic controller say there, dead pilot. I think what he really meant by that was probably audio at this point. I don't think he's making the conclusion that the pilot's dead. I think he's saying that there's no contact. Just so, because, I saw some comments online that people said, at this point the controller knew the pilot was deceased. I don't think that's what he's saying. If you listen to the context of it, he's just more saying, they're out of communication and they don't know what's going on. So this next audio, you can now hear that the F-16s are getting close enough to where they can actually get a view inside of the flight deck.
Second Tulsa's coming up on the left, climbing.
Man, I've got a clear shot. It looks nice over. We take a visual. Minneapolis, Tulsa 1-3.
Tulsa 1-3, go ahead.
So it looks like the left side cockpit is iced over. The glass is iced over.
Tulsa 1-3, roger.
To deposit.
Your left 8:30 going to 9 o'clock low.
So you probably heard Minneapolis Center there being called out. This aircraft eventually crashed in Aberdeen, South Dakota. And at this point, you can actually hear the F-16s. They see a turn, they see movement in the aircraft, but what's happening is the aircraft is running out of fuel. And so the icing obviously indicates a loss of pressurization. We talked about hypoxia, and now the aircraft has flown from Florida to South Dakota, and it's running out of fuel.
Copy, 50, okay.
Got some movement out of them. Hey, Bigfoot, we're getting some movement out of them right now.
Holy balls, what's going on with that? Where are you at?
6 o'clock.
Okay, can I come left?
Go ahead.
What's he doing? What's he doing?
He's in a right-hand turn now.
Bigfoot, he's in a right-hand turn now.
To come back to the east.
Going east. Bigfoot.
So this is near the end. The aircraft flew for a while longer, basically gliding without fuel, and then went into kind of a spin spiral scenario. So we'll finish the audio here with that communication.
I'm at 30,000.
29 minutes, Center Roger, ready to contact 5 southeast to the sea for
What's the guy doing? I lost him.
He's going to impact the ground shortly. I lost him.
Okay.
At this point, the aircraft impacted the ground in Aberdeen, South Dakota. The Learjet cockpit voice recorder was recovered from the wreckage, contained an audio recording the last 30 minutes of flight. The older model Learjet, the aircraft was not equipped with a flight data recorder. The Lear began a right turn and descent, as we heard, and then a descending spiral into the ground. Impact occurred about noon local time after 3 hours and 54 minutes in flight. The aircraft hitting the ground at nearly supersonic speed at an extreme angle. It left a crater 42 feet long, 21 feet wide, and 8 feet deep, obviously destroying the aircraft. The National Transportation Safety Board conducted a major investigation to the crash. The conclusion was a probable cause of incapacitation of the flight crew. They didn't get supplemental oxygen after a loss of cabin pressure, and while the exact reason for the depressurization remains unknown, with the result was a deadly case of hypoxia, or lack of oxygen that can quickly impair brain function. The investigation found that oxygen system appeared to be functioning and available. The masks were plugged in, valves were open, and oxygen should have been flowing, so why didn't the pilots use it? Likely answer was they were already impaired by the time they needed to act. Hypoxia can take hold as little as 8 seconds after a rapid depressurization at cruising altitude. In those few seconds, cognitive function can degrade so much that even experienced pilots can't complete basic tasks like putting on a mask. The report also noted prior maintenance issues with the cabin pressurization system, including at least one case where the plane was flown with an unauthorized deferral. Unfortunately, poor documentation made it hard to trace whether that was a reoccurring problem that had been overlooked or not. In the end, the NTSB couldn't definitively say why the crew didn't get oxygen in time, only that they didn't. Obviously, a tragic loss for everyone, tragic loss for the golfing community, and something that, again, to take and learn lessons from. So now we know at least one primary accident, and that was something that, again, if you go back to our very first episode, something that touched me personally as I was, let's say starting in the industry, but early close to the beginning of my industry, something that touched me personally, and the fact that, it was one of those accidents that you're like, oh, wait, I, have some connection to this beyond just something, I don't want to say that's random, but, goes back to some of that early onset for me into aviation. So now that we've talked about hypoxia, what can we do if we find ourselves in that scenario? So if you're like most of us and you're just traveling on an airliner, obviously listening to your flight attendants, getting that mask on for yourself as quick as possible, as they say in the instruction videos. And then if you're flying with loved ones or people that maybe can't get their mask on, once you get your mask on, help them put their mask onto themselves. If you're flying yourself, so if you're a pilot like me, or if there's other pilots, as we know, that listen to this, you probably already know, but if you're flying above 10,000 feet, especially in an unpressurized aircraft, so if you're like Jeff Miller, always have supplemental oxygen available, and don your oxygen mask immediately if you suspect a pressurization issue. Time of usefulness consciousness at 30,000 feet is less than 30 seconds. That's like the max. So again, if you're flying on a commercial airliner, you're usually between 30 to 40,000 feet. So if you think of a depressurization scenario and you're a passenger in the back, you need to get that mask on as fast as possible, knowing that your upper limit on that is about 30 seconds. Waiting to troubleshoot before putting on your mask can be fatal. Mask on first, then diagnose any situations beyond that point. For pressurized aircraft, follow altitude alerts and don mask if cabin pressure is lost, no hesitation. And I think it's also important to know, too, because like I said, when I was up there, if you're a passenger, I actually remember, I mentioned David Letterman twice in this, and I don't know why, but I remember David Letterman where Tom Cruise, as we all know, is a famous pilot, he flies himself. He's told a story once where there was someone annoying in the back of his aircraft, and he didn't want to listen to him anymore, so they slowly turned the oxygen levels down, and he was like, my hands are getting tingly. So I remember him telling this story, but hypoxia can sneak up suddenly. Like I said, for me in the Rockies, I kind of felt a little bit off at over 10,000 feet. Lightheadedness, euphoria. I'm always a little bit, you're listening to this podcast, you probably have a feeling of euphoria right now. Dizziness, tingling, trouble concentrating, and visual disturbances. Maybe, now that I'm reading this, just always in my own head, I have hypoxia. And you know what? Somebody wrote on my LinkedIn the other day that they like listening to the podcast if you can get through my jokes. So thank you for the shout out. And we talked about if you're a passenger, but obviously if you're flying on a plane at high altitude, notify the crew immediately if you're feeling unwell. Don't assume it's minor. Early intervention is key on this. On some aircraft, portable oxygen is available if you ask the crew to assist. So again, I'm not opposed necessarily to mountain flying or getting up there. I think that would be really cool, but I obviously would go with someone who's experienced in a certain area to do that. Because obviously this is just one component is higher altitude, but there's so many things, especially in a smaller aircraft, if you're in those mountain areas, downdrafts and weather patterns, and just topography, right? And as I was sitting there and you could see these storms kind of circulating around the hills, it really turned into one of those things where you're like, wow, I'm kind of like in a cradle of a snow system. So it was really cool. I actually went swimming too in 28-degree water. It's the coldest water I've ever been in. But I wanted to do the double H, hypoxia and hypothermia. Well, my friends, the clock tells me that it's probably time on this solo trip that we took together to get down on the ground, maybe get ourselves some supplemental oxygen from Mother Earth here. But no, I want to thank everybody again for listening, for tuning in. If you're traveling, thanks. Feel free always to drop us a line at dapodcast85@gmail.com if you have anything you want to hear on the show, if you have any comments, you want me to say something about you on the show, I'd be more than happy to do that. Always happy to engage with people that are listening. If you like the show, please tell a friend. We would appreciate it. I am getting close to the end of my lessons from the Admiral, which means he needs to be on the show here sooner than later so we can discuss it. But there's lots of good lessons in there for people, and then brush some of those old habits. It's a good reminder of how to conduct yourself professionally in the workplace. I've been enjoying the book. So without further ado, wherever your travels may take you today, friends, I hope blue skies and tailwinds for you, and until next time, I will see you down the runway.